Hello and welcome to the Two Trees podcast. My name is John Dillon, and I'm here with my very good friends Martin Listner.
Hey, all.
And Jacob Kessling.
What's up?
And the Right Reverend Nick Church, not appearing in this, but is lurking in the background. I'm not really sure what he's up to, just kind of critiquing us from it. Oh, he's studying. It's okay. We all work at different churches, but we enjoy hanging out together. But I'd like to welcome you to the Two Trees podcast, where we talk about angels and demons, ghosts, the pagan gods, and the weird corners of the Bible. We like to talk about the beliefs of the ancient world, the way that they talked about the supernatural world, all to help you gain a deeper understanding of the people and cultures of the Bible. We want you to be able to read the Bible on your own at a deep level, and we're here to help you to do that. We don't want you to be bored with the Bible. We want you to see what's going on behind the scenes, to pick up the patterns and the literary designs the ancient authors of Scripture used as the Holy Spirit led them to write the Bible. But most important of all, we are here to talk about Jesus and to talk about him as Deuteronomy 10:17 describes God. The Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, mighty and awesome. And this is, in particular, a discussion on temples. We started it, and we're going to finish it, hopefully, today. Did you have anything that you guys wanted to pick up before we go?
I think we got so much planned for this episode. We're going to get into it and really ride with it. But something I did want to mention is how you guys can get in contact with us. We really want to hear from everybody how you're enjoying the podcast, what we're doing wrong on the podcast. And the best way to do that really is through the Facebook group that John has created. It's just type in Two Trees Podcast. You'll find us. It has our emblem at the top, same one you're looking at right now while you're listening to us here. And you can become a member on there. You can also just comment and whatever. You get a little behind the scenes stuff about my basement and you know how dirty it is with all the Christmas gifts that are down there.
Your basement was nice.
It was great.
And all that. You also see John's beard out of control. He still hasn't trimmed it yet. But if you don't know
Christmas
John,
beard.
that's what he does best. Is
It grows
grow
really
facial
long,
hair,
and then I cut it short. So it's like a cycle.
Yeah. Also, my beard, the first time I've ever had one in my entire life. So don't be too mean on my beard there in that picture. But
baby beard.
if you want to be, come on out and tell me what is going on with it. So like us on there and let us know if you have any questions about something we've said. If you want us to discuss something on the podcast, we'd really love your input on there. Also, you can send us an email. We have an email address if you don't do the Facebook route. It's twotreespodcast@gmail.com. That's the number two.
Yeah, number two.
Number two trees. Podcast@gmail.com. We'd be happy to hear anything that you guys have to say. And like we mentioned previously, you got a pretty good chance of us bringing it up on the podcast at this point in time.
So we wanted to get into this, but Jacob, you got some big news. Your son's coming home, isn't he?
Yeah, so he gets to come home for 2 weeks for like an exodus. He's away at Fort Benning, Georgia, doing his 11 Bravos infantry training. Went through basic training, and then he is now doing his infantry training. I don't know, for some reason he wants to jump out a perfectly good airplane, so that's his next journey. But he gets to come home for 2 weeks, and we're all excited. It's my oldest, and it's so funny. I mean, when I'm through military training, I was 23 years old, and you're at a different place than when you're 18 years old and you're a young man trying to figure out who you are. So I think he's at trained killer status, and it's so funny, his mindset. I absolutely love him to death. He's worked so hard at it. He just finished his field training exercise, but he'll be coming home on Friday, so I'm super pumped about it.
So has Sheila at the house already? Is she excited to have?
Oh yeah, it's like she told him, she's like, I'm going to clean your room and I'm going to make your bed. And, she is super excited about it. It's funny because I could tell he's gone. He has access, I think, on the weekend to his phone, so he's shopping. I mean, you got like boxes and bags. You don't have anywhere to spend your money, really. I mean, you go to the PX or whatever, but there's very minimal you can buy. So
I picture this like he's going to come home and there's going to be like a mountain of presents, and then like the rest of the kids will be like, here's some ramen noodles,
Oh, no, what we should do is wrap all the stuff he's bought for himself, and then here's your gifts. You have tons of, anyway, he has tons of like Rogue Fitness outfits. I mean, he's all excited, and I'm super proud of him. So it's been a great journey for him, and he's got 4 years.
We're all proud of you, Lane. You're done awesome, and I do hope that one day your dream of surviving jumping from planes for no apparent reason becomes part of your repertoire of things that you do on a regular basis. But I do think we're all pretty proud of you. Jacob keeps us updated on what's going on in your life, and so we're glad to have you home. Your son doesn't jump out of airplanes, but
he jumps off the couch every chance he gets.
That's where it starts.
Normally onto me. is the biggest problem.
When you're not ready.
He is the heavyweight champion of the world, weighing in at 40 pounds on there. So he's a little undersized, but boy, he has the heart and the energy to keep up with the big dogs.
That's
so
awesome.
So yeah, so he's starting his jumping career out.
Nice. Well, we're going to jump into our topic here. Last time we were discussing the idea of temples, and it was intended to be a one-part episode, and we just really couldn't cover the content that I had hoped to, and so we decided to break it up. And so what we're going to do here is not so much talk about the concept of pagan temples, but really to focus in on what did the Bible and its culture, what did the Jewish people think, what did Abraham think of temples, what were the ancient Israelites as they wandered around in the wilderness thinking of when they pictured the Garden of Eden or they pictured the tabernacle, because I think that a modern reader is going to have a very different opinion about what the Garden of Eden was or a temple was. And these ideas are very connected. And to understand the way that the ancient Israelites thought about the temple, we really need to understand the Garden of Eden, because it serves as the archetype for all of these places. It was a place where God walked with mankind, and mankind served the Lord in harmony, and it is the memory that all of these later things are looking back to as their source of inspiration. And when you talk about the Garden of Eden, people are sometimes surprised to think that not all the world was Eden. Eden was a very specific place, and in Eden was a garden. So not even all of Eden was the Garden of Eden. It was a specific place that had defined edges, and whether it had walls or, I don't know, you are now entering Eden. I don't know how that worked.
That's such a weird thing because, like, if you just think of it logically, it makes so much sense. Like, the entire world, was probably the same shape or the same size, or at least roughly, when it was back with Adam and Eve. But it's so easy to think, like, obviously the whole world wasn't just this big garden. Like, they didn't walk thousands of miles around to make sure that they pruned the bushes on the backside of China, So, but it's like, but when you're thinking of it as like they're the only people on Earth, it's the beginning of creation. Like, it was the whole world, But it's like, it's hard to differentiate those two thought process of like, it wasn't just the garden everywhere, but then on top of that, when you go even deeper, it's like Eden was a place, and then the garden was in Eden further than that. So it's like, holy cow. When you're thinking of this logically, like, it should make sense from the beginning, but it definitely didn't click for me until we were discussing.
Well, Eden had to have some kind of perimeters, because as they were kicked out, there was gates, and so you're seeing that some perimeter. Perhaps that's where we got the praying of a hedge of protection. I don't know. I'm just joking. I don't know why we pray that prayer, but I do that. It had to have some parameters to it, but it was a location, and in the middle of it, yes, you have your tree of life. And
it is a real physical location. It's also a real spiritual location, and it's a bridge between the two. To be in the Garden of Eden is to be in the physical and the supernatural, the spiritual world at the same time. And in a lot of ways, the temple was made to preach that idea. To go into the temple wasn't just to walk into a church building. To go into the temple or the tabernacle was something reserved for the elite, for the Levites, and only specific Levites. You didn't just wander in there and be like, I got an office in the back, and I hooked my PlayStation up, and I was just working back there. That didn't happen. Instead, what you have is the idea that the world itself was made by God on purpose and for a purpose. And the Bible describes it as being designed and created in three parts. You have the heavens, the earth, and the seas. The heavens carry the idea of the spirit world. The earth that we walk on would carry the idea of the physical world, the realm of mankind, the world that we inhabit. And then the sea has this sinister quality to it. It's the underworld, it's the beneath, it's the symbol of chaos. And all through the Bible, you're going to find, like in Daniel's visions, the monsters rise up out of the sea. There's this tremendously elaborate motif of God's power over the seas that is really clear in Jesus' life when he speaks to the sea and it becomes calm. Mm-hmm. That wasn't just saying Jesus is really good at forecasting weather. That was instead a way of saying this is God this is the same one whose spirit hovered over the waters of creation. And they had a very real connection to this underworld, the world of man, and then the spiritual world above it. And in that garden, that Eden garden, mankind acted as priests in this place where heaven and earth met. Genesis 2, verse 15, tells us that Adam and Eve were supposed to work and keep the garden. That doesn't, like in all the pictures on the flannel graph boards that I grew up with, Adam and Eve didn't work and keep the garden. Mm-hmm. They just enjoyed the garden. They lounged around and they, I don't know, chatted with zebras or whatever it is they felt like doing that day. But the idea that there was a purpose and a job for them never really came across in the teaching that I experienced. Did you guys experience that different? Do you think of them as working in the garden, or as like they're on vacation?
Yeah, more of a vacation, tropical hotspot. But to me, it makes more sense that they have a purpose that goes along with it, because in any utopian-like society, it's never as good as what it seems to be, right? There's a lot of books that have been written and a lot of good movies that are out there, because you have this idea of like, man, you could just sit back, relax, and have a pina colada whenever you want one, and there's probably a cool breeze at all times, and you're laying in your hammock, and this, that, and the other, and it's like, man, that's just really good. But when you talk about eternity, like what you're supposed to be doing for all of creation, that doesn't really appeal to me anymore. It's like, man, that's nice for a weekend. That's nice for a long week, a relaxation. But it's like, man, we got to have something inside of us. And I think maybe as human beings, it's like, there's got to be something that eventually you got to do, and you got to have this purpose. And it's like, man, God gave us that from the beginning. So it's not just like, here's this perfect place where you can relax and I'll do all the hard lifting. But it is that, plus you get that purpose and fulfillment as well by keeping it and tending to it.
Yeah, I used to think that I've heard people say this in my younger years of like, dang it, Adam, because I have to go to work and stuff. Things would have been easy. But when you read the scriptures, it's clear that God gave them a job. It gave them some work to do, some responsibilities. I don't know if it was strenuous, hard, or if he hated his job, but certainly he created us to work. And so we were sharing that work with God. God gave this responsibility for us to carry here on earth. And so again, it's interesting that these are just small things that we kind of think because of statements that are said. And like the flannel graph version, we don't see Adam and Eve with a hoe or a rake or whatever. I mean, but yet they were created to work.
And it connects also to the idea of heaven. What are we going to do for eternity? Are we just going to sit around and play harps?
Sing songs.
Yeah, I'm not a very musical
harmony.
guy. I know that upsets people. It's not. I don't get the same joy from musical services. That
so you don't like. You're not going to like heaven then. So because
yeah, I think I will like heaven though, but I don't think it's all one dimensional. Is what I'm trying to say.
All I know is I laid down on a purple mattress the other day. If you know what the purple mattress is,
yeah.
Hashtag not sponsored. But it was like the greatest thing ever.
Like laying on a cloud.
I can only imagine what those clouds are going to feel like.
Yeah.
When we're up there, like that thing was as close to heaven as I think I'm going to experience.
Man, I don't think you're going to get to lay on any clouds. Man, maybe you will. I don't know. The Bible describes it differently, but I mean, you can take it up with management and see how that goes.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that.
We'll probably. I know we'll talk about this in other episodes and stuff, but I now think, well, we're going to have something to do, a responsibility as well in heaven. Don't know what that's going to look like, but I don't think it's going to be sitting around or just.
The Bible talks about us ruling and reigning as having purpose, having something we're contributing.
Yep.
And Adam and Eve were also contributing. They had a vital part. They were made to do this, and so whether they enjoyed it or not, I think they did. I think God made them for this, and they were to work and to keep the garden. Now, those two words, abad and shamar, are used later in the Bible to refer to the Levites working in the holy place of the temple. And they used those words specifically to connect this idea back to the garden. Just like Adam and Eve worked in the garden and were the priests of God, so later on the children of Levi would work in the holy place and keep this holy place. And they were to keep it, to tend the lamps, to keep things looking right and doing the job that it was supposed to do. They were to serve God in the temple. They were to guard the temple. They were to keep it and to make it work. And that's what Adam and Eve seem to have been doing in the garden.
You're saying the same words used for Adam and Eve, the work that they're doing is the same words used as the temple
Yes, and
priests.
biblical Hebrew does not have that many words. It just doesn't
That's
have
cool.
a ton of words.
That's really
and
cool.
so what the Bible does when it wants to connect ideas back and forth is it will purposefully use words from another story. And by using those words, it's like clicking on a link. I love that Tim Mackey talks about it this way. It makes total sense to me. But it opens up that file, and all that information is supposed to be then brought along with it. And so if God is trying to make you think, hey, you're going to be priests, you're going to be serving me, then he would use those same words. And that's exactly what they did. So mankind is thrown out of the garden. They have their job and they messed it up. They defile the holy place. They, instead of serving God, they decide to define right and wrong for themselves. They're cast out. And as soon as they're outside of the garden, we get the impression that they begin to act as priests. Cain and Abel go up to the edge of Eden, apparently, and are offering sacrifices. No one told them to do this. It's something that they seem to have understood. We are Adam. We are humanity, and our job is to worship. I mean, every culture around the world, humanity seems to know this. We're worshipers. We are to reach out beyond just the physical. And that's what they seem to do here. God talks to Cain and he says, listen, sin is crouching at the door. What door? Did they have doors? I mean, did they like build a little apartment, a little bungalow? We don't know, but there seems to have been this idea that, in my mind, Adam and Eve, they got thrown out of the garden and then they wandered for like a bazillion years off into the distance. That really doesn't make much sense. You would move right outside because the goal is to try to get back into Eden. You want that restored relationship. And so when Adam and Eve and later on their children are making sacrifices, I have to think that this is in the back of their mind. Can we restore the relationship? Can we come back? We'd like our place back with you, Lord.
And it's interesting that you say, because something had to be instilled in them, and I think it's because when they got their duties, when Adam and Eve got their duties in the garden, it's instilled throughout humanity, like you're saying, because I've had some really cool conversations with a lot of people in this room here tonight about how God never really told Adam and Eve the rules of engagement when it came to the sacrifices that they are supposed to do. But somehow inherently they had the idea that, yeah, we need to do this because this is our purpose, is to get back in there and start tending that garden again. And then later on in that story, somehow they figure out that one of them got it right and one of them got it wrong, right? Even though God really hasn't come out and laid the law out as of yet. So there's something that was instilled in the garden that is, I don't know if you want to say a primal instinct that they have, or just some kind of instinct that's like, we need to get back into it. And I think that reflects even later past.
Well, I think
Cain
every
and Abel.
culture knows that things aren't right. And we have this craving to be united with the unseen,
You think
understand that.
you think sacrifices were made in the Garden of Eden prior to the fall?
It doesn't seem so.
I know. Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about death. I don't know if I just think of God's space as a place of life, not death. And I know that sacrifices happened at the temple, but I mean, it's in my head. I'm just processing this out loud right
Well,
now.
they weren't really even needed, right?
Yeah, we don't have any evidence of sacrifices made in the garden, but we do have evidence that right outside the doors of Eden, they were offering sacrifices.
I wonder if, again, they were clothed with animal skin. If somehow that was the connecting piece of a sacrifice, appeasing. I don't know. I just, how would they have come? I thought about this a lot, and never did I imagine as to where they were doing this. I never imagined they were next to Eden or at the gates or anything like that until I watched all those Tim Mackey videos, and it just kind of blew my mind.
Stellar.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And the weird part is that one of the doors open and stuff, and it makes your mind wander all over the place. But there's something that's happening. And I also was thinking about when sin's crouching at your door, made me think about that. Your adversary, the lion seeking whom may devour, just this imagery towards the evil one trying to crouch and attack and pounce on us too. And it's just, my mind goes all over, which is great.
When I hear the word crouch, I really do think of a cat.
Yeah.
I think of like a hunter. And Peter would later on describe Satan as a lion seeking whom he may devour. And I think he was in part this tradition of thinking of Satan this way goes way, way back into the almost the beginnings of human history. And so Adam and Eve don't know how to get back in the garden. They're not sure. God doesn't tell them. Later on, mankind is going to be given the law, but Cain and Abel had no concept of that. They're doing the best they can with the information that they've got, and we know that God is still in contact with them. He leaves heaven, and he comes and speaks with them. Even Cain is talked to by God after he's done horrific sins, and God goes out of his way to protect him. And so what we see here is that mankind is not capable of fixing the problem. God has to fix the problem. And that if mankind on our own just makes up rules and makes up, well, if I dress this way or eat this way or talk this way, or if I adopt these rules or those rules, that will make me holy. It doesn't get us any closer to the kingdom of heaven. Unless the Lord comes to us, we're sunk. It was when they offered the sacrifices, we find that God came out to them. What if he didn't come out? They would think, well, that's what we expected. We don't deserve God's attention, but the Lord loved them so much and loves us so much that he does. He seeks the sinner. And that becomes a major motif throughout temples and into the New Testament ministry of Jesus.
So I'm kind of connecting a little bit here. If we are now the temples, us personally as human beings, and we know our job, like we just discussed, is to tend and to keep, right? But we have this lack of patience, if I can take from your sermon just the other day, this lack of patience to just tend and to keep, that we have to create our own ways of making it work, right? So that's why we create these rules and these ideas of like, we're going to fix this, but we already know the answer. But we don't have the patience or the ability to wait with this expectation of what's to come. We have to go out of our tending and keeping.
That's right. It's
and
not
start creating our own solution.
I'm excited about that concept. I just preached about it, and it's been all over my mind. But you can't make the plant grow. Mm-hmm. You have to wait for God to give the increase. And the same way, you can't make heaven come to earth. You wait for the Lord. And that's what we're doing now. We're waiting. Mm-hmm. We're waiting for the coming of our God. And he's revealed lots of things to us. But salvation has always worked the same way. It's always been by the grace of God. It's never been through works. But access, the way we approach God, that does look different throughout time. We find that if an ancient Israelite were to come to your church service, they would be, I think, a little surprised at what we're doing or the lack of sacrifice. It doesn't look the same. And so God has not ever changed, but he has known that people do. And so his approach to us has adopted to make sense to us. It isn't that the Lord is like, oh, I'm really tired of that old way of doing things. I'm interested in a new, fresh feel. That's not what's happening at all. Instead, what you see is one plan unfolding piece by piece throughout time. God is working overtime to bring about Eden. The very end of the Bible reads a lot like Eden. Yeah. You have the river, you have mankind again, the temples, serving God, worshiping God, the trees on either side. You have almost what should have been Genesis chapter 4. Except it's the end of Revelation.
I was just thinking about, and I know this, I just popped in my head. Here's Adam and Eve are supposed to tend the ground. They're taking care of things. They're kicked out of the garden, away from God, away from his space, out of his will. And now they have to work and work and work to find that life is hard, meaning not just their life is hard, but that it's hard to find life. Plants aren't growing like they should. Everything is very, very hard. And that's such a beautiful illustration of what happens in our own personal lives. We want to walk away from God and his purpose in our life, and we want to try to find life out of the things outside of his will, outside of his garden, outside of his space. And it is hard and it's hurtful. And so for me, like when I was 20 years old, I just at a place of just total desperation, realizing nothing this world has to offer. And, in that moment, God just drew me back to himself. I was just thinking about that idea that they came out and they had to till the ground. They had to work really hard. They had to see very little come out. So
I think that testimony would make sense to just about every generation of human.
Yep.
that the circumstances may change, but the need that we have is the same. We need God.
That's right.
And sometimes mankind didn't know how to approach God. We find the ancient cultures were making stuff up left and right, trying to find ways to access the supernatural. And God had a plan, but you had to wait for him to unfold it. The next time we see this is really with Abraham, the patriarchs. God gives them a little bit of information. He talks about circumcision. He talks about, following me, going to this new land. And then the rest of the rules are pretty few and far between. It doesn't talk a whole lot. And so I think the patriarchs did the best that they could. But at that point, the plan of God begins to unfold, and you realize that God is going to use this one family to draw all men back into the garden, to bring us all back into fellowship with him.
So is that, I know this is an impossible question to ask you, John, sorry, I'll just preface with that, but does that mean that they were just basically running off the instincts of what they knew the garden used to look like, Eden, the idea, the blueprint of Eden, that's where their temples looked like? Mm-hmm. Back in those times, they were solely running off of what they knew or what they've heard about.
And you find an uncommon connection between cultures when they talk about their temples. They were high places. They were filled with water. They were filled with fruit. They were filled with pretty much their little perversions of the idea of Eden. I don't think that's an accident.
And so when I'm trying to think, I'm trying to go into the mind of God to understand, the meaning of life and all this.
Oh, good.
That,
let us know.
So,
that.
Once I figure that out, I'll let you know what it is. But it's almost like, to me, that humans were doing okay with reiterating what the temple was supposed to be. But the further you go throughout human history, almost the farther away we've gotten from the original temple, if you will. So God is like, well, once they get so far away, maybe I'll sprinkle in a little bit here, and then bring them back on course, and then they'll go off, and I'll sprinkle a little bit more to bring them back on.
I'm going to shoot off in a different direction here, because I don't think the way that they mirrored Eden really mattered.
Okay.
I don't think God was up there like, well, once you get it close enough, then I will reveal myself. I don't think it had anything to do with human hearts at all. As a matter of fact, you get the idea that God designed his tabernacle. This was his idea. And he didn't take it to the people who were making the best temples in the world.
That's right.
He didn't go down and be like, we're going to take a survey. Who's got the most comfortable accommodations, and maybe I'll pop over there.
He didn't check the Yelp reviews.
No, he picks a group of people who were slaves in Egypt, and he's like, this is it, man. These are the guys that I have made a covenant with, and I'm going to hold on to this. And we really find this story kicks into gear, the idea of temples, in the book of Exodus, chapter 19. And I'm going to read you guys this part, and you guys just kind of think about it, and I want your thoughts on this, because this seems to me to be a time where the supernatural world and the physical world collide, and you see beyond just this physical into the supernatural world. So this is Exodus chapter 19, verses 16 through 20. It says, on the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people of the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. They took their stand at the foot of the mountain, and Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like a smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And the sound of the trumpets grew louder and louder, and Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. Then the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. I think if I was one of these Israelites and I had been thinking about this, I would think, this is it. This is the end of the world. We are going back into the garden. God has come down. Here's the high place. The Lord has called our boy Moses up there. Let's go. Like, this is it.
And it's interesting, though, because the fact that God responds to him with thunder. Whenever you, again, here's another movie reference. I'm sorry that I get all my information from movies. But when you're in a movie and, there's something big happening, the guy's standing there in a rainstorm and he says something very profound, and then boom, the lightning hits at just the right time. It's like, it's so perfect. It's like, that's just a reflection of what happened in the Bible, right? Like the greatest book ever written is the one that's in our hands right now. It's
we're ripping off the Bible left and right.
That's where it started.
On our movies and stuff,
but it's like, you just know how profound that is of a moment, because it happened during that time. But it's also, when you think of, this may be, and I'm stealing this from Jacob, we just talked about it earlier, it's one of the few times that God comes back to his people, or responds to his people in a long time. And so it's like the garden was when the supernatural and the natural were intermixed, and now here it is again. It's got to be an important part, right? I agree with you 100%. I would have been needing the new drawers after that happened with that. But it reminds me also of a text in 1 Thessalonians, for when it says, this is 1 Thessalonians 4:16, for when the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and the trumpet of God. So again, it's like this.
That same wording is used.
Yeah, this big event that's happening. But it's like, that being a temple is not something that I would ever put into the effect. But that's what the temple is trying to accomplish.
That's exactly what it is. There was a place in, later on, the Jewish temple, which was called the place of trumpeting. They went and they sounded the ram's horn, the shofar, to call the people to worship. The blasting of trumpets was very much a part of a king's progression somewhere. And remember, the temples were considered to be the palaces of the gods. And so if he's the king of kings, this is his court. They're calling out, God is coming. The king has risen from his throne, and he steps down from the heavens onto the top of the mountain, and it goes up in fire. And then God says, hey, Moses, come here. I want to talk to you. And they must have thought, well, that's the end of Moses. That was it. It was nice knowing you. But I think the people, when they see that, they're terrified.
You can imagine Moses just like, any of you guys named Moses? Like, is there a Moses here?
I was thinking about the trumpet blast. I mean, for me, whether it's a trumpet sound of a proclamation of a king, different, or a sound of trumpet like the battle, because that would change my whole thought process about this trumpet sound. I don't know how well antiquated they were with those types of sounds, but it was a proclamation of something, and it had to get everybody's attention. And then, of course, the ground shaking. This is one of those moments that are terrifying. And the fact that Moses is going up, like he's approaching. Can you imagine how people were like? They were probably elbowing each other. Like, I'm not going to say a word. What's going to happen? It had to be a terrifying, amazing, awe-inspiring. I mean, all wrapped, all those things. You imagine being a kid watching this. I mean, you start thinking about all this, but it would have been an amazing moment, but scary.
I think so, and I think that imagery of Moses ascending the mountain to where God is, that is not a man-made picture. That's not something that you can just say, well, that's just people's ideas about how to talk about God. That is an image that God chose to reveal himself to us. He uses the same one later when Jesus ascends into heaven. It's not saying that his spaceship picked him up and they zipped off to Operation Heaven, far away.
Scotty.
No, he went into the spiritual world. That was something that ancient people understood instinctively, because that imagery was part of their culture. It's not to us. And so if we're going to pick this up, we need to read this not as Westerners, but to understand, what did this mean to the readers, to the original audience this book was written to. And you're going to pick this up again later on.
But is this idea of the mountain, is this God basically reiterating what he wants his temple to look like? Because if you think of the whole idea of the temple is a place where the supernatural and the natural can intervene with each other.
They saw it as there's this great rise in the earth, and the earth touches the sky. They didn't climb mountains for fun, okay? There wasn't people out there who were just like, let's get up there and take some photographs. That didn't happen.
But again, it's
in their mind, it was a spiritual connection.
But is
the
this
earth.
God showing his people what he intends it to look like?
Yes.
Right? So it's
not what he intends it to look like. He's trying to explain what is.
Right. Okay.
He's not saying build it this way. He's saying, I'm trying to explain to you what I am and who you are and how the two of us can come together.
And he's instilling that in the minds, not just of Moses and the people that were there, but just humanity, mankind, right? That's why it's written down. That's why we're to study it and think of it this way. Is like, so that way everybody, whoever hears this or reads this, will have the same understanding of how the world works.
And this was something that humanity knew all over the world. If you wanted to reach up into the spiritual world, you built an altar. You built something high. Here in Ohio, we've got the mounds everywhere across the world. There are pyramids. There are places, way up in the mountains in China or Tibet where they've built monasteries. That's not just because somebody hiked up there and was like, you know what, this is nice. Let's
view.
build here. They're making a statement. We're leaving behind the rest of the world, and we're approaching something else.
So can you imagine? I mean, just thinking about this, Peter, James, and John are walking with Jesus.
Man. Yes.
Can you imagine? I mean, I just think of like this in mind, because Jesus would go up and pray, because I don't know how often he took them up mountainsides, but I don't know. I'm not saying they're expectant, but like we're going up. I mean, this is kind of scary territory, and then Jesus transforms and right. And you see these, that would have been mind blowing to me, but I never thought about that. I thought it was like,
who does he meet on the mountain?
Elijah
and
Moses.
And Moses.
Yeah.
That's the guy. Like, the story connects, man. It's not an accident.
Cool.
So we get in the book of Exodus an interlude here of the things that God tells Moses while he's on the mountain. And then in chapter 24, it picks the story up again. And it says, then Moses, this is chapter 24, verses 9 through 11. This is a good time to pause the podcast and go read it for yourself and draw your own conclusions, and then come back and yell at us because we didn't say what you wanted us to. This is what we're pulling out of it. So in verses 9 through 11, it says, then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 of the elders of Israel went up. So it doesn't say 74. The wording makes a clear distinction that there's two groups. There is a group of 4, and there is a group of 7. I don't think the Bible's words are accidentally thrown around. I think the Bible is written on purpose and for a purpose, and that the wording matters. And so he's specifically set this up to make two different pictures. And it says, these people, when they went up, they saw the God of Israel. They didn't see a burning bush. They didn't see a cross. They saw God. And
they saw Jesus?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
This is a physical something.
Because what are you going to say when, the Bible says that no one has seen God at any time?
It's the express image of the Father.
Yes. Okay.
If I had to call this somebody, I have no problem saying, I think I'm looking at my Jesus here.
Yes. Okay.
And so I see they looked, and under his feet, so he's in the air, he's in the heavens, there's what looks like sapphire stones, but they can see through them. They're like the sky for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel, but they beheld God, and they ate and they drank.
That's awesome.
That's Eden language, buddy.
That's cool.
That's what they did. They ate and they drank. Now, in the Garden of Eden, the number 4 makes its first appearance. We find that there is one river that flows into the garden, and in the garden, it divides into 4. So the number of people is listed as 2 different parts, and both of them have symbolic significance. And in the scriptures, the number 4 is often connected to God's kingdom, God's power. It flows to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. And so by simply dividing up the nation or the people this way, the author is also telling you something. Who is this God that's come down? He's the God of Eden. He's the God who rules the north, the south, the east, the west. And then it does something I think is really interesting. He calls 70 elders of Israel. There have to be more than 70. That's a very specific number. And the word elder here can mean quite a few things, but it mostly means the leaders. What was the cut for this? Did they wake up, and there was like an invitation under their pillow? You have been invited cordially.
Approximately 70 of you.
Yeah. No, it says, listen, exactly. I need 70 of you. We're going to go up there. And the number 70 connects a lot of ideas in the Bible. In particular, in the book of Genesis, we find that when mankind rebels against God at the Garden of at the Tower of Babel, God divides the world up into 70 nations. Yeah. And in the book of Deuteronomy 32, it tells us that over each of those nations is placed one of the watchers, an angelic power who was supposed to draw them to God and instead rebelled, a fallen Elohim, a little g God. And so you have here all of this being voiced with just the numbers that are here. It's saying, yes, the world is in rebellion against God. Yes, the world does not accept this God. Yes, mankind has fallen away from a relationship with God, but I'm fixing it. I'm calling you back.
That's
and
cool.
my power will flow from this mountain just like the rivers did from Eden. In the Bible, the number 10 connects to the idea of the voice of God. We find God speaks 10 times. In the creation account, we find that God gives 10 commandments. So if you're trying to connect ideas, the authors would use similar symbols. We still do this in our culture with pictures or images. If I wanted to, tell my wife I love her, you draw a little heart. You don't draw like a rhinoceros. Like, it doesn't have that meaning. If you want to convey like certain ideas, colors, that's not modern stuff. The ancients have always done this. And for a culture who has put no other culture that I know of put as much value in the written word as the Hebrew people. And they crafted unbelievably complex pieces of scripture. And God is revealing his truths through not just numbers, but also through the way he set up this whole event. Couldn't God have grabbed the disciples and said, walk with me down here to, the local pub or whatever, and bam, here I am, I'm transfigured into glory. Why go up a mountain? Couldn't God have just said, to Moses, don't worry, don't come up here. You guys get comfortable. I'll come down there, and I'll bring baskets of manna, and the angels will pass it out. And you guys just relax and let me make things better. He doesn't do that. And I don't think it's an accident. I think he's preaching. He's showing, not telling.
That's cool. No, I was just thinking about, is this kind of like a hyperlink though? I mean, when we read it, we just see 70. Like, why are all these repeated numbers all the time? But they want you to go back. They want you to think about these other pieces and these other things.
That's
like you
right.
said, there probably wasn't exactly 70, but this is bringing us back to the nations. This is bringing us back to the bigger story. This continual idea of the big picture story versus just this
if
one.
there was exactly 70, that makes it even better.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So, but what I know is that when they wrote this, they connected the ideas.
No, that's cool.
Because the Bible does not need to tell me how many elders went up. Mm-hmm. He made a conscious decision to do that. This is something that the Holy Spirit led the author and the editors later to do. Tell them this. What did they wear? I don't know. How far up the mountain did they go? I don't know. Did they offer sacrifices before they went? I don't know. How many of these guys were really old? How many were young? Were any of these like? It doesn't give me any details, but it specifically gives me that matters. And so,
that's cool.
As a modern reader, we want to push past that and think of it just as a frivolous detail, when in reality, it's under the surface preaching. It's showing, not telling. And in the Bible, especially in Eden, when we think of Eden, we think of an abundance of food. Of there's a little bit of everything. Everything you need is here.
See, that's the point that stuck out to me when you're talking about the detail. Like the detail is in there for a reason.
That's right.
They didn't, or he didn't lay a hand on him, but they beheld God and ate and drank. Like, why do they bring up the fact that they're eating?
And where did they pack it up there?
Right.
They're like, all right, everybody, make sure you've got the right foods.
Prepared a table for them.
He
I think
prepared
of like
a table
Bear
for
Grylls.
them.
They had their
beautiful.
backpack on before they went up the. Just in case.
And all through the Bible, this same image comes back. You have trees planted by waters, and the people have enough. All through the wilderness, the Israelites are fed by the hand of God. Even for us today, we go to the table and we take the bread and the cup, and we remember what God has done. And that element of eating and drinking brings unity back to us, draws us into the presence of God. This is Eden language. And so what was happening is supernatural, not just physical, but supernatural. Even as they wandered around in the desert, we find the Bible says that there was supernatural things going on. I'm going to read you guys from Deuteronomy 33, and this is verse 2. Again, pause us here. Go check it out. There's a weird thing here, and it talks about when the Lord left Sinai, when the Israelites left Sinai, and they started wandering in the wilderness. God didn't stay on the mountain. He didn't say, this is my new capital. This is where I'm going to be. You guys come back here every couple months and check back in with me. Instead, he goes with them. This is what happens here. It says, then the Lord came from Sinai and dawned from Seir upon us. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came with 10,000s of his holy ones with flaming fire at his right hand. So you have the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness, but you also have the court of the Lord moving with them. The tabernacle is going from place to place, and the court of the Lord is moving with them. These events in the physical world are not the whole story. We get glimpses of this, but you got to really pay attention to the details. It continues to build this idea all the way through the Bible.
That's so amazing. I mean, it's just amazing to me to think about. I mean, I know God has already made a proclamation that I am your God and you're my people. But was it not common for any other gods that people worship that they had to go to the God? This is the God that's coming with the people. Like, this is totally foreign, totally strange, but yet he is a God above all gods. He is different, wholly different than any other thing. And it's just, for me to see that he's following, he's going with, I just think that's a beautiful picture.
It always reminds me of Hagar when Abraham sends her out more or less to die.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And God, he doesn't say, well, you didn't come ask me. He says, look, you see me. You are the God who sees. Mm-hmm. That God isn't limited like these other pagan deities, but the Lord is with you whithersoever you go. That he knows it isn't the way that they tried to build it in the pagan world. It is that God is always aware. So even if you can't go up to the temple, the Lord is with you. Even if you couldn't go into the courtyard of the Lord knew. He heard and answered prayers, whether you were on holy space or not.
And further than that, if you look at really what happens, it's not like he just sees you through like his crystal ball. He's like, oh yeah, I see you over there. Don't worry about it. Like, look at the resources that he brings with him. 10,000 of his heavenly hosts come with him, and a flaming fire at his right hand. Like, he's not there. He's there and ready. Like, he's prepared. Yeah. When I think of moving my family of 3 just to get, to a place on time, it's kind of a hassle, and we have it pretty easy. It's like God is moving a bunch of resources around to be with these people at all times.
We're going to start calling you the quartermaster, somebody whose job is to get it all together and move the army.
Right, but it's like, and he's glad to do it. It's just, and he's with them through thick and thin.
I just think so much in the Old Testament, people view God as grouchy.
No, I don't.
And he's not.
No.
The Old Testament is beautiful, and it shows the love and the reach of God as he desires to be with his people and goes out of his way to make that a reality.
Yep.
The best example of that I have is the flood when we did it on my podcast. Sorry to plug my own podcast on here, but
also not sponsoring this podcast.
But we were talking about the flood, and afterwards when it's the rainbow, and I'm pretty sure it was Jacob that mentioned, like, you would think it would be a sledgehammer. Like, hey, don't ever do this again.
You know what's going to happen.
I'm bringing the wrath. But it's like, no, it's like a rainbow. It's a gift. And so it's like, God isn't just this guy that's up there ready to smite whoever looks at him bad. It's like, he's the God of love from the beginning. And so that to me had a big perspective change from when you're thinking of, what God's done to certain places that don't do the right thing. But it's like, no, realistically, he's given you more than enough opportunity to be a gracious and loving God. So it did
for him to be a gracious and loving God.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Might not have been what I said, but it's what I
don't
meant.
want you to be one.
So when God's moving, and it seems like he's kind of hopping from mountain to mountain. But like, what was the temple or the tabernacle as they were moving?
Oh yeah, well the tabernacle was, again, it was well, let's just jump into that. So the tabernacle is a place for God to dwell among his people. Like you said before, for most of the time after Eden, they had no idea what God was up to, where God was. There's a couple places like where Jacob builds a little altar and he says, I saw heaven, this must be a holy place. But wherever the tabernacle went, the pillar of cloud, the fire was present. And it goes with them. It was a place not to be a church building. It wasn't designed for everyone to come in and have a seat in a pew and worship. It was designed to be a place for them to see and for the Lord to be physically there with them in this place. It was supposed to be kept clear of stuff that reminded you of sin or of death. So if I punched you in the face and you started like to bleed, you're losing blood, you're supposed to wait till you stop bleeding and then go become ritually pure and then come back. It wasn't that you couldn't come. It was that you had to come having realized where you were going.
Yeah.
You had to have had time to approach that. If a woman had a baby, she's just given birth. She's not expected to drop everything and grab that baby and run up there and say, God, please bless this child. I got here as soon as I could. The Lord says, let's take time. Take time. And prepare yourself and come to me when you're ready. And that you don't find that in other religions. This is God being so loving, and we instead interpret this as these are the rules. You broke the law. Here it says this. But the tabernacle was built to remind people of the situation as it stood at the time. They couldn't get back to where God was, and they'd been kicked out of Eden. And so the last thing that we had was Cain and Abel at the doors of the garden offering up a sacrifice. If you went to the tabernacle, you would find a place which was the holy place, and it was designed to look like the Garden of Eden. And outside of the Garden of Eden, outside of the holy place, were altars. And the people all came there, and they offered up their sin offerings. They went to the Levites, and that place represented in their minds the physical world that we're in. And they would bring the sacrifices there. But things had gone a step further. And now there was a group of people, Moses and his relatives, who are allowed into the mountain. They are in the garden. Yeah. They are in the holy place. And they are working and keeping the same language that's used of Adam and Eve in the garden. They are there to go about their work in the holy place. And there's a tree that pulses light, the table or the lampstand that's there. There's an altar to offer up incense before the Lord, and there's a table there of food for them to eat. Most temples, it was the other way around. You brought food in there to feed the god. In this temple, God feeds his priests. It's the inverse of that idea. And the building itself was made to look like this. It had trees carved into it and flowers and fruit. You can find this go take a look at how Solomon built the temple, or that description of Moses when God is telling him, this is how I want you to design it. And there's pomegranates everywhere. There's flowers everywhere. There's trees everywhere. And at the edge of the holy place is a curtain, a veil that separates this place that represents the Garden of Eden or the temple. And behind it is a room that no one goes into. And on the curtains are woven cherubim.
That's awesome.
Spiritual beings. And so the imagery is behind this world is the spiritual world. Behind this is the throne of God. And in that room was something called the Ark of the Covenant. In the book of 1 Chronicles.
That's just so
Oh, go ahead.
I get goosebumps when I hear that nowadays, because I remember the first time you mentioned that the veil had the cherubim on it, the same way that the cherubim are placed at the gate of the garden. And I was just like, man, that's so cool. That's the best hyperlink that I've got from you so far. So I appreciate that.
I've been helpful
the most. But for real, it's like we build the temple, and this is as close as we can get, right? Like we even understand that when they built the temple, when we thought of the temple then, it was like, yeah, this is really good, and we're doing the best we can. We're doing everything physically possible in human nature to get back to where we want to go, but there's still this one thing that's preventing us from getting
we can
there.
come so close and no further. In 1 Chronicles 28, verse 2, David calls the Ark of the Covenant the footstool of our God. In Psalm 99, 1 through 5, and in Psalm 132, 7 through 8, and in a bunch of other places, you get this idea that the Ark of the Covenant is the base of the throne of God. And so they viewed God as sitting in the heavens and also on the earth.
So yeah, it's that's just really, really cool how both of these are meeting over. But that's his I almost feels like an insult that it's his footstool, but it makes total sense. But I think that's just really, really cool to think of it that way.
Yeah, and it keeps talking about the Lord who's enthroned above the cherubim. That imagery is man. As soon as you went into the Holy of Holies, there were the cherubim. They're on the ark. They're in the temple. They built really big ones that were in there. That imagery was there to show this is the spiritual world, and only one man was called in there. and he was only supposed to go under only special circumstances. I can't get my words to work.
But you just think of how humbling that is. Like, this is the footstool. This is what God puts his feet on, right? Like, this is as low as you can get on the totem pole of God. And yet, if we even touch it, like it's curtains, if you will, on there for us.
That's
but,
great.
But for real, it's like, man, how humbling of a thought is that? It's not just like, not only are you not allowed in here, but if you even touch the lowest part, like if you even think of it, you don't deserve that. Like, that's just a humbling thought when you put that into perspective. It's like God rules over the cherubim and all this, that, and the other. Also us, right? Like, remember where we are in the hierarchy of this when you're trying to put yourself in the position of God, like I do so often on there. But it's like, man, just make sure that we're in the right spot with that too. That was just a thought come through my head there.
I want to kind of wrap up the thought going back to the veil and to talk about Jesus. Because when the actual event that all of these sacrifices pointed to, the actual death of Jesus, when God came to earth to fix what we could not, and he goes into the temple and he cleanses the temple and he says, you've made my house, my father's house, a den of thieves. And he's preaching and he's making it so clear. And then they says, we don't believe, we don't want you. They take him out of the city and they murder him on a high place, nailed to a tree. On that tree where God is literally hanging between the heavens and the earth, it says that as he was dying, the earth shook and the sky went black. I'm thinking Sinai again.
Yeah.
And then it says that the veil ripped from the top to the bottom.
That's
Not
awesome.
something that we did, but something that God did. He came down and he rips it open.
From the
And
top
from
to the
this
bottom.
point on, the
That's
temple of God dwells within us. The Spirit of God is with us. All of this, it's just so beautiful to me. I see the hand of God teaching us through the trees of Eden what Jesus is like and what it means to live in a relationship with Jesus, and that no power on earth is greater than he is. In Exodus 12:12, it says, the Lord says, I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. The gods of Egypt, those pagan deities, those fallen beings, they cannot stop the will and work of God. My God, my Jesus is the God of gods, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, mighty and awesome.